gives the contrast, the after. But that is not the way you learned, again, there's the mind, Christ. Assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus. What did Jesus say in John 14, verse 6? I am the way, the truth, and the life. The devil tells us all these lies. If you want to be happy in your marriage, if you want to be satisfied, well, then you've got to get certain things. It is a zero-sum game. And you've got to get what's yours if you want true happiness. And if you don't get it from this person, divorce them and find somebody else. That's not the thinking of Christ. That's not the truth that is in Jesus. That's not the way we think. That's not the way the new man operates. We put off that old man with that corrupted, vain way of thinking. That was our former manner of life. Corrupt through deceitful desires. All those promises that the devil made but could never really keep. We are renewed now. Again, transformed from the inside out in the spirit of our minds. We're putting on the new self, created after the likeness of God. The idolaters make gods in their image. God is wanting to operate the opposite in us, to change who we are, to where we no longer resemble what we once were. We are transformed and renewed and shaped and molded and made into the image of God. We become like Jesus Christ, where we're no longer thinking in such a selfish way. We are created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. And then, and this is what we're going to look at this morning, he goes through this list of before and afters. Here's little mini before and afters. The way we used to behave before with the way that we behave after. Used to, we were characterized, and think of these in terms of marriage. We were characterized by falsehood. The way you get what you want, the way you get what you need, walking as a Gentile does in marriage, you can't be completely honest. You have to use manipulation. You have to use deception to get what you want, to get what you need, to be happy. But that's not the way we learn Christ. We speak the truth now. Used to, we would just fly off the handle at anything that made us angry. But now we control that anger. We subdue that anger. We don't sin. We don't allow our passions to dictate our actions. We would steal, maybe literally stealing from our mates. But of course, stealing comes in a lot of different forms, does it not? It's not just material theft that's being condemned here. And it's not just that we labor, working with honest hands what is good. We do those things looking to give to the one who is in need. Instead of thinking about what we can get, what we can take, what we can grab from somebody else, our mate, we're only thinking in terms of what we can give away. And corrupt talk is replaced by edifying words. Bitterness, anger, clamor, and slander is replaced by kindness, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. And notice how he ends this chapter. As God in Christ has forgiven you. Let me read it. Verse 32. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ has forgiven you. And of course, he didn't write with chapter divisions. Chapter 5 and verse 1 just continues the thought. Therefore, be imitators of God. How did he begin this? In chapter 4 and verse 24, that we put on the new self, created how? After the likeness of God. What are we being called to? Chapter 5 and verse 1. Be imitators of God. Why do we not lie? Because God doesn't lie. God only speaks the truth. The devil is the father of lies. Why do we not sin when we get angry? Because God doesn't sin when he gets angry. Why do we not steal? Why do we only give? Because that's the nature of God. All of these things are just reflections of the God who made us. And he is now remaking us in his image. And so think about how if we were to take chapter 4, verse 25 through 32, just take these verses. We're not even going into chapter 5 yet. Just take these verses. If we were to let this be our default in marriage, how that would transform. Talk about it before and after. You can imagine the picture of the marriage that's defined by all of these characteristics on the left side of the screen, what that looks like, how chaotic it is. versus what the after looks like. A marriage that's characterized by the right side of the screen. It's a stunning transformation, is it not? And let me say this, and I'm going to say this throughout this series. It only takes one person to transform a marriage. Now, I understand. As much as depends on you, live at peace with all men. I understand. Your husband may be won through your conduct, 1 Peter 3 and verse 1. I understand that. But don't think that for this transformation to start, that it depends on both of you at the same time, simultaneously working all these things together. It only takes one that will choose, I'm going to work on myself, and I'm going to seek to employ these characteristics of God in my marriage. You can be the one to help transform your marriage. You can begin the process. Let's turn the page if you're looking at the notes. To the 4 human gifts. Turn over to Genesis chapter 4. This is a story that you're perhaps familiar with, of where Cain kills his brother Abel. I use this to illustrate the 4 human gifts. This is not a term that I came up with. It's something I'm stealing from Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits book. He writes about the 4 human gifts. Self-awareness, the ability to step back from yourself and evaluate your emotions. Imagination, the ability to think of a principled response. Independent will, the power of choice. And then conscience, that inner voice that tells us if something's right or wrong. You can see all 4 of these exercise, or at least God calling on Cain to exercise these human gifts as he reasons with Cain to keep him from doing what his flesh is telling him to do. So Cain, his sacrifice is rejected. Abel's is accepted. Cain is very angry, verse 5, and his face fell. Verse 6, the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary or for you, but you must rule over it. Notice the 4 human gifts. You notice God calling on Cain to evaluate his emotions. I can see that you're angry, Cain. It's written literally on your face. His face fell. You can normally tell. Body language doesn't lie. He's angry, but the Lord says, why are you angry? I'm asking you. I know why you're angry. God knows what's going on. He knows us better than we know ourselves. But he's asking Cain to step outside of himself, which is very hard to do, to look at his anger and ask himself the question, why am I so angry? Is this about Abel? Or is this not about Abel? Is this really about me? The next question, he says, calling on him to think of a better principled response rather than what his flesh is telling him to do. If you do well, will you not be accepted? You have the ability, Cain, to choose a better path than what your flesh is telling you to do. Be angry and do not sin. You can do better. If you do not do well, though, sin is crouching at the door. And then he calls on him to use the power of choice that God has given us. We don't have every argument, or every discussion, I should say, does not have to end in an argument. My mother told us as kids many times, it takes 2 people to argue. You don't have to, you don't have to argue. You can control your anger. You can control your words. You can speak and act in a principled way. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. You have that power, the power of choice. And then when he does kill his brother Abel, the Lord comes to Cain and says, where is Abel, your brother? Why is he saying, where is Abel, your brother? Why not just say, where is Abel? Why does he emphasize your brother? Because he knows what Cain has done. Cain has decided, I want a brother divorce. That's essentially what he's saying. Am I my brother's keeper? Is that not what we're doing in marriage when we say, you know what? You do you. You're going to do your own thing. I'm going to do my own thing. Whatever. Is that what we vowed when we made those vows before God? That we're just going to live under the same roof? We're going to share the same space? And until death, we're going to suffer through this? Is that what we promised? No, we promised to love, to honor, to cherish. That's what we promised. We can't deny this relationship. We can't turn our backs on the obligations and the covenant that we made before God. Where is Abel, your brother? Maybe God is looking at you and me and saying, what's going on with your wife? What's going on with your husband? That's your responsibility. God has given us these human gifts to exercise them, to use them. And so let's talk now about the circle of influence and the circle of concern. Turn over to 1 Samuel 25. Have you ever noticed that arguments follow a very predictable path? I mean, it may be kind of surprising to you for the first year or two of marriage, but eventually you figure out, after a few years at least, that when she says this, or she does that, or when he says this, or he does that, under these circumstances, what happens, what follows it's a very predictable pattern of stimulus and response, stimulus and response, stimulus and response. And you can almost, before she does what she's going to do, or you do what you know what the next step is going to be, like several steps in advance. Why do we do that? Well, number one, because we're not exercising the four human gifts. We don't have to follow that predictable pattern. God was trying to put a stop to Cain and say, all right, let's step back and look at ourselves. Why are you angry? What's this all about? Let's choose a better way. That's one reason. But another reason is we fail to see the ability that we have to influence in a positive way. Stephen Covey also talks about this circle of influence and circle of concern. The circle of concern are all those things that we are concerned about. The circle of influence is a smaller, and it's always smaller for everybody, a smaller area that we can actually control, where we can actually influence somebody else. And what he argues is that more that we focus on the circle of concern, the things that we can't control, which you can't control your wife, you can't control your husband. The more we focus on that, the smaller our area of influence becomes. So, in other words, your ability to influence your husband is greatly diminished the more you nag him about all the things that you want to do. That's focusing on the circle of concern. By nagging, by playing the part of a wife who's like a continual dripping on a very rainy day, the proverb writer talks about, your circle of influence gets smaller and smaller and smaller. You think that this is going to lead to something being fixed around the house or him being more responsive to your needs, but it actually works in the exact opposite direction. Husbands, we do the same thing, just in a different way. By stepping in and we're going to show them who's boss, and I'm the head of this house, and she's going to step to whatever I say. The smaller and smaller, that's where we're focusing not on our area of influence, but area of concern. But when we focus on the circle of influence, what we can control, that's when it actually grows, and we get more and more ability to influence our husband or wife. And a beautiful example of this, both in a negative and a positive way, is found in 1 Samuel 25. We're not going to read this whole chapter, but I want to say that this chapter should be studied by every HR department in the world, because Abigail just gives us a beautiful example of how to use and exercise influence. David is running from Saul. That's the setting of 1 Samuel 25. Chapter 24, we see David spare Saul's life, and they're in a cave. But David's running from Saul, and he's got this group of hundreds of men, 300 men that are following him. And they're kind of providing protection for the wealthy landowners. And what's expected in the culture of that time is that the wealthy landowners who are receiving help from these men would provide them with bread or provide them with water or supplies, needed supplies, whatever that is. And so David makes a request of Nabal, one of the wealthy landowners. Verse 9. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David. And then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed from my shears and give it to men who come from I do not know where?" So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, "Every man strap on his sword." And every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. All right, so just from verses 9 through 13, can you see the difference between the circle of concern and the circle of influence? What do we see with Nabal? How is he viewing his relationship with David? Is he viewing it in a godly way, one who fears God, who looks at the commandments as we need to be merciful and be kind and hospitable to the stranger? Or is he looking at this through the prism of the devil's way of seeing things, through the eyes of the flesh, the old man of sin? Is that the, which is it? Is it the circle of concern or circle of influence? Clearly, this is all about him. It's mine. It's not yours. Why should I share with you? What about David, though? Is David using the circle of influence or the circle of concern? There's a lot of testosterone in this chapter. It's like you got these two men that are at each other's throats, right? And look, this is the way the world works. Life is a zero-sum game. You better get what's yours. Nabal is thinking selfishly. David's thinking in terms of justice. I mean, you might prefer David's side a little bit more because he has a right. He was clearly wronged here. But is this the solution? Is this the way that you help others to see what they need to be doing? How is David operating? Clearly, it's through the circle of concern. And then, when Nabal's servants find out about this, they don't go to Nabal. They go to Abigail. Verse 14. "Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we were with them. They were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this, and consider what you should do. For harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man, one cannot speak to him." Who in this household was the boss? Well, you would say Nabal's the boss. He is the father, he is the husband, he is the man of the house, he is the one who commands his servants. But who is the one who has the most influence? When there's a problem, who do the servants go to? Do they go to Nabal and say, "Hey, we got this problem, you need to fix it"? Or do they think that would be the worst thing to do? This is not going to get better if you go to Nabal, it's going to get worse. No, they go to Abigail. And when you see Abigail, the way she responds, you understand why they went to Abigail. Because she is a woman who understands the power of influence. Verse 18. "Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisin and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, 'Go on before me. Behold, I come after you.' But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came under the cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, 'Surely in vain have I guarded all this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him.' When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from her donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant. For the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the care of the living, bound in the bundle of the living, in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, for my Lord working salvation for himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. Now, how do you think David responded to this? How do you think things would have turned out if the servants had instead gone to Nabal and said, "Hey, Nabal, you know that guy David? He and all of his men have taken the path to our house, and they're ready to fight." What do you think Nabal would have done? And how would that have turned out? But when Abigail comes out, here is this, one woman, 300 men, and David, who's ready to fight. And yet this one woman turns away an entire army simply by her words and her actions. And listen to David in verse 32. And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand." Look at this. She made haste. She hurried, fell down, bowed to the ground, coming with all of these provisions. She said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt." She's the only innocent person in this whole chapter. And yet she's taking the blame. Praying for forgiveness. This is all circle of influence kind of stuff. Humility, kindness, patience, meekness. She doesn't excuse his bad behavior, but in a way she's saying, "I get it. I understand. You've had just one interaction with him. I've been married to him for however many years. Look, his own parents named him Nabal." And that's what the name Nabal means, is folly. I don't know why you would call your child a fool when they're born. But his name is folly. I get it. I understand. She's trying to lessen the blow on David, reasoning with him. But she does not excuse his behavior. Don't misunderstand. She rebukes David. Now, she doesn't come out there hand on hip, wagging her finger and saying, "How dare you come onto our property and treat it," That's not what she's doing. But in a very gentle way, in a very godly way, in a very wise way, David praises her discretion. She says, "Do you understand what you're doing? What you're about to do? You're working salvation for yourself. You're going to ruin everything. The Lord is planning to make of you a sure house." She seems to know a lot about a man that Nabal doesn't seem to know anything about. Who is this son of Jesse? And yet she brings up the promises that God has made to him. She brings up the fact that apparently he's used a sling in killing Goliath. That's what's going to happen to your enemies. They're going to be cast out. But she is showing such wisdom in pleading with David. You don't want to do this. This is not in your best interest. This isn't good for you. She's not doing this for herself. She's not doing this for her husband. Someone would argue, if any other woman had been in this position, she would have just secretly snuck out the back door and let, God take care of her husband. Finally I'm rid of him. But no, she's not even doing it for Nabal. She's doing it for David, but not even for David. She's doing this because she's concerned about God. She's concerned about the plans and the purposes of God through David. She has the bigger picture that nobody else in this chapter seems to have. She is using her influence. My Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation for himself. And chapter 24 and 26, on either side of this chapter, this is exactly what David tells Saul he will not do. But here in the middle, you have this woman who bravely goes out. And at the end, after pleading with him not to do this for his sake, she says, and oh, by the way, when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, remember your servant. Such humility. Such selflessness. Is there a power in this? Absolutely. There is a power in this. So let me just make one final challenge for you. And this will be the challenge at the end of every lesson. Earlier this year for the college study, one of the presenters, when he delivered his lesson on prayer, made a challenge that I found really provoking and challenging to me. He said, I want to challenge you to get 1% better. I want your prayer life to get 1% better after this series on prayer. I thought, well, that seems like a very modest goal. But think about that. What could happen if this week, if today, you said, you know what? When we go out to dinner today, or when we go home and eat, or when we go about our business this afternoon, all that old stimulus and response, that familiar pattern that my wife and I, my husband and I get into, 1%. I'm going to change 1%. I'm going to control my tongue. I'm going to just vow this week, I'm not going to respond and allow my flesh to dictate what my tongue says. I'm going to get 1% better. I'm going to work on one thing. Is there something at the end of Ephesians chapter 4 that you could work on? And maybe just 1% better and see what God can do with that. Exercising that influence. And maybe we can look back at the end of this week and say, you know what? By making that one improvement in my marriage, we haven't been following the same stimulus and response pattern that we always do. She's actually nicer to me. He's actually more responsive to me. Things are actually getting a little better by us doing things God's way. And this is God's way. When we read about Abigail, does that example of Abigail remind you of anybody? Can you think of someone who came to this earth and said, I'm going to prostrate myself, I'm going to make myself the lowest of the lows, and I'm going to say to the one offended, I'm going to say to God, on me alone be the guilt. I'm the one that we were reminded of in the Lord's Supper, and yet he was the one who took what I deserved. It's interesting, the crucifixion, what it looks like physically. What kind of posture is this? Is that a defensive posture? A defensive posture is like this, right? But not this. What is that saying to you and me? It's saying he's left himself wide open. And he did leave himself wide open to unfair rebuke and criticism, literally spitting in his face as he's displaying the greatest gift of all. What if we were to change our posture from this to this and display the love of Christ? Not hoping for anything, opening myself up to what I'm sure the devil has convinced me, well, you know how she's going to treat you if you do this. You know how he's going to take advantage of you if you do this. What would happen if we changed our posture in marriage to resemble that of Christ. That's what he did for you. That's what he did for me. And I am the one. I am the one. And you are too. Why not accept the grace that he has offered? Talk about the circle of influence. No act in history has been more profound in changing more people than what Jesus did on the cross. Talk about the circle of influence. Why not respond to his grace by repenting of your sins, confessing your faith in Jesus Christ, and being buried with him in baptism, as together we stand and sing.